tv.com/learn Swift. We are a monthly meetup all about teaching Swift to people. So we have a small slideshow we usually like to do at the start of a meetup. So if you don't know, we are a Learn Swift City organization. Long story short, there was a man out in California named Garrick, was a lawyer, and one day decided he no longer wanted to be a lawyer, so he quit his job, started driving Uber so he could learn Swift on the side. He got a book, read it, got as far as most of us can get doing that alone, and he started a meetup where he would speak to other developers in the Los Angeles community, and together they learned Swift. And he turned that into a podcast, which you might know is the Swift Coders podcast. And in that he said, hey, if you're interested in starting a meetup in your city, give me a call. I'll give you the secret sauce. And I did that, and here we are 3 years later. Normally we are an in-person meetup, but given the quarantining and scares around COVID, we have gone digital for the last several months, and we plan to continue to do this the third Thursday of every month digitally until things seem a little bit safer for us to get together as a group. So we do have an abridged agenda for tonight's meetup. We normally do some networking and all of that and let people get to know each other, but tonight we're starting out with introductions and announcements. That's where we're at right now. And then as soon as I get through this spiel, we're going to talk about refactoring. So it's going to be a pretty interesting and exciting meetup that I think hopefully will help a bunch of people sort of get to the next step in their coding journey. But real quick in chat, we would just like to know the next thing you'd like to learn. Knowing what the community wants to learn, it helps us start to get more of our sessions in line so that people get as much value out of this as possible. You know, we talk to you all on Twitter, on our Slack group, and even here in this Twitch chat, and we get an idea for where people are at in their journey learning iOS development or coding with Swift. And so we try to gear our sessions towards helping that. But getting that direct feedback definitely makes sure that we're always providing the best content possible for you all. So if you don't mind just letting us know that in chat, that'd be super cool. We have a sister meetup. Swift Coders meets the fourth Thursday of every month, so the week after Learn Swift Boston. And that is organized by my normal co-host, co-organizer, Zev Eisenberg. He cannot make it here today because he has a nice little bundle of joy at home that he's being a good father with. But they meet and they sort of do more roundtable discussions. So he tries to get people that are sort of working on the same areas talking together and helping each other. So if you have pointed questions about something you're working on, check out Swift Coders. They're also on Meetup, and if you take a picture of this QR code, it should go directly to the Meetup page where you can find out information about the next time they're meeting. We are also a Ray Wenderlich affiliate, so if you use this QR code, you'll be directed directly to Ray Wenderlich's website, and there, any purchases you make using that affiliate link will give us a small percentage of your purchase, and it helps fund this meetup. We have a website, we have special little ideas for fun things when we're all back in person, and that money goes a long way to help funding that. So if you're interested in buying books or tutorial series videos, that is a great place to look, especially with WWDC happening next week. This is a great place to keep an eye on. Those are our announcements for this week. Hi John, how you doing? Thanks for checking out the stream. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna jump right into the refactoring portion, the meat and potatoes of this meetup tonight. So this is some code that I put together this past Saturday on a live stream. The VOD should still be available on my channel, so if you go to videos, You should be able to see how we came about this. I originally wanted to follow a tutorial, but I couldn't find a tutorial that was exactly what I wanted. Also, I didn't really want to put a tutorial writer on blast for doing a bad job of writing a tutorial. So what I have cobbled together is sort of what I would see people that come to the meetup sort of have in their project after following a bunch of tutorials or just finding things on Stack Overflow, which for sure can help you out when you're getting to learn all of this. But you've got to be careful about just taking things blindly. It does kind of make your code base a little bit weird, but also if you don't know what you're copying and pasting, you don't know you're copying and pasting the right thing. So I've got this little app that hits different subreddits on reddit.com, and if you tap into this text field, you get this nice action sheet, and you can select one of 3 subreddits that I provide, and it will go ahead and hit the network and present the, I think it's first 10 or 25 posts for that. That's what you can get out of the box with using Reddit's APIs without a dev token. And then once you tap on one of the entries, it presents the image for that entry full screen. I used to have this chair. It's a good chair. So the code for that, let's start with our storyboard. In our main storyboard, we have a table view that has a fairly simple table view cell that is the image and the title for the post of the subreddit. And we've got a segue from tapping on the cell. We just show that image full screen in a modal. Jumping back into the code, so you can see this table is hooked up to subreddit TableViewController, and here I declare all of the data objects necessary for rendering that screen. So we've got the enum that powers our action sheet. We've got all of our codable objects that represent the response. So the highest level, we get a JSON that is data. From there, it has an array of children that has a post, and a post has a title, a URL, and an image. I also had some coding keys because I did not, I turned the URL into an image. Let's see if I still have, I do not still have what that JSON looks like, so let me quickly hit that. So you get all this mess, and if you go to your favorite JSON editor, it turns into this. And so you can kind of see, here's the response, and that first child is data, and then we go into children, and then we get our post that has data inside of it, and we've got the actual data. So this is how Reddit is rendered, and this is how we're rendering it for tonight. So when the view loads, I create the header, so that's the text field that's up here, and that is in table header view with the zib that goes along with it, which is just the text field, and a little bit of picker view delegate stuff. I use the will move to set up the delegate, the data source, and the input for the text field. And I added an accessibility identifier because there are some broken constraints in this, and I can't, at least Saturday, I could not quickly figure out what was going wrong with them. And everything visually looks alright, which is enough for tonight's demo. But if you use !project in chat, you can go directly to this repo and feel free to pull down the code and let me know what is wrong with my constraints. So this header tells the table what subreddit was picked by reaching up into the application, And you can see we have that same get function here. So this is where our networking code is. And we take whatever subreddit is passed in and we go dispatch out to get the post information. And then when that comes back, we dispatch out again to go get the image URL. And finally, when all that's done, we notify that we have our posts. So we build our posts in here as well. Other parts of the code, so we've got the table view stuff down here. So here I am trying to get the table header view to show up. I had some trouble with that on Saturday's stream. And then I'm just setting up the number of rows and then laying out my cell. And finally, here's my segue code. So this is what gets triggered when you tap on the table view cell, and we show our full screen modal, which I don't have a view controller for. I thought it, oh, here it is, full image view controller, which is just when you hit that segue, I set this image value. When the view loads, I set the image on the image view. It's just a pretty plain view controller. We do have a table view cell. There's no real code in here, just a place to hook up my outlets. Cool. So that is the overview of the project. Feel free to ask any questions as I'm going through, but now we're getting ready to do the refactoring. So a good practice, if you're not familiar with Git, ooh, I named this Refactoring. That's bad. But a good practice with Git is to make a branch for the work that you're doing so that your code is done in isolation and you have some clean state that you can go back to, which in our case is our branch called mainline. So I will go to my branch called Refactoring. And now that we're in there, you can see this has changed to Refactoring. Your terminal may not look like this. I've got a few plugins to make mine look a little bit more fancy, but that's okay. So now we're ready to make changes to our code, and we'll create snapshots throughout this whole process called commits, so that we make sure that we're always pushing up clean code. And so clean code is sort of the general goal of refactoring. There are a few different techniques. There are some great books written on refactoring. I'm not going to go line by line of a book or chapter by chapter, but I'm going to sort of give you some of the things that I look for when I'm refactoring some code. So those mainly are code duplication or code being in a weird place or too much code in one place. Another thing I like to do is remove code that's not important. So you can see this cell is a great place to start because we don't have any code in these functions, and I don't really ever plan on writing any code in these functions. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete those now. And we've got this nice clean cell. So this lets me know, as someone that comes with this code later, that all this file really is a place for us to dump some outlets. So that's our first refactor, so let's go ahead and commit that right away because we know this is a good state. And you're going to see that that's kind of a theme in the beginning of this meetup. So there's some code that I intentionally left in there because a lot of people that I've seen leave it in there as well. So let's go to our TableViewController. We'll go for the smaller files first. So again, our full image view controller. We don't navigate from this view controller, so I can delete this code that is auto-generated by Xcode when you create a view controller. If I did want to navigate out, I can just simply get rid of the /* on either side and //. That is a block quote, so anything that's between those 2 or 3 characters will automatically get commented out. But again, I don't need this code, so let's just get rid of it. And we'll get rid of all of our empty spaces. Another thing that is auto-generated for us when you create a new view controller is a view-did-load function, and it says do any additional setup. People have different opinions about comments like this. I don't find them useful, so I tend to get rid of them. Do what makes sense for you. So the whole idea, the whole practice of refactoring is making your code faster or more performant or prettier or just like easier to understand. And the reason we do that is it makes it easier for us when we come back 6 months later and we forgot what all these things are. But also if you work with other people, if you're on a team, if you have a single style or a single way of doing things, it makes it a lot easier if all of the things are consistent. So we're just making our code clean and consistent. And again, I'm just going to commit what we did here. Actually, I'm just going to use that exact same commit message. Oh no. There we go. And I'll change this file name. Cool. So now we'll move over to our table header view. Something else that I see commonly when looking at people's code is there's no real organization to their things, the code that's in there. And I'm not trying to say that my organization is the best organization or the right organization, but there are some things that have sort of become idiomatic in Swift. So you can see here on line 34, I've got a variable in the middle of a bunch of functions. From the compiler's perspective, there is nothing wrong with this. And in fact, you might love doing that because this variable might be related to the code that it's near. So for instance, let's do a bunch of quick reorganization here. If I have this up here, and let's bring this here. I now have all of my picker view code in one place, and I can do something that used to be called a pragma mark, and I don't know what it's called now in Swift, but in Objective-C days you would do pragma and then mark, and you would type something. We've turned that into just a comment that has mark in the front of it, and I can say UI picker view. And what this does for us is it gives me a place in the code that sort of delineates sections, and also in this class dropdown you can now see my little UI picker view comment is right here. If you want to level that up to the next level, you can put a hyphen in front of it, and you can see in my editor that has drawn a line, and that line will also come in this function dropdown. So now I've effectively made code sections that are a little bit more easy to navigate. And in fact, I'm going to do another one of those. Another one that I like to do commonly is lifecycle. So if this becomes a large file, all I have to do is go to this drop down and I can find my lifecycle functions or my picker view functions. And that makes it all a whole lot nicer. But that's not where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to do something that you might have seen in your tutorials, you might have seen in code on GitHub if you just read other people's code, and I'm going to do an extension. And what this does is it lets me cordon off a chunk of code based on either, I guess in our case it's going to be from a conformance to a protocol. Oh, hello from America, Mancod. So in our case, we're going to move our UI picker view delegate code into this extension, and our UI picker view data source into this extension. There's a couple reasons you might want to do that, but the main one is that you now have your related code in one place. So maybe our PickerView delegate function, a group of functions gets really large, and I need to move that to a separate file. I can do that just by taking one chunk of code. And it also gives us more granular chunks of code. So we are looking for our did select goes in here. And what else is a delegate function? Row height, title we use. And I think these two are data source functions. Okay. So we've cleaned this up a bit, but we still got our little floating variable here. And you're kind of left to decide, does it go into one of these extensions? Well, I'd say no, because the picker really belongs to the view. So I would bring that up here with my other variables. So now I know when I'm looking at this file, my variables are at the top, then I go to my life cycle functions, and then I go to my PickerView delegate and my PickerView data source. So we've got things sort of organized and put in all the right places. So I'm feeling pretty good with this. There is one more thing I would like to do to this file, but I'm going to come back to that when we are finished cleaning up the view controller. So we'll commit this. Ooh, geez. Refactored table header view by reorganizing code into encapsulated extensions. Cool. And you know what? In case you want to play with this at home, let me push this up. To the remote. So if you do !project, you'll be taken to the project repo for this, which is at this URL. And if you, on the left, you'll see mainline. If you click on that drop down, you can select the refactoring branch and you can see the code as I'm pushing it up. Cool. So let's go to our TableViewController. Now this is by far our largest file, but it's also not the largest file I've ever worked with. It is starting to get a little bit annoying to navigate all of this, but we're going to do some work to clean this up. And real quick, you know, just to be safe and sane, let's run the app again to make sure we didn't break anything by removing all of that stuff and moving things around. So our app loads, we get our aw subreddit, and I'm curious, oh, these two cats got busted kissing in the refrigerator. That's cute and weird at the same time. So it looks like functionally our code is all still there, or still working as we expect it. A good way to verify that is with unit testing. We have done several sessions on unit testing at past meetups, and I think we might be doing one before the year is over. But I did not write unit tests in advance of this session, so forgive me for that. But normally with each refactor, you should be running your unit tests to make sure everything still works and nothing broke. Okay, so first off, we've got all of this code that's commented out that Apple, or Xcode rather, immediately put in for us. These are common table view functions because this is a table view controller, but our table does not use them. They're mostly around editing the rows and like the order and deleting and all of that. So we can just remove that immediately. And here we go. We've got the prepare for segue was automatically imported for us, just like with the full image view controller. But it's got a bunch of these comments that don't really help. So in a storyboard based application, you'll often want to do a little preparation before navigation. That is 100% true. But if I have put code in here, chances are I know what that is for. So I don't need that anymore. And this kind of gives you hints of how to use this. So it says get a new view controller using segue.destination, which is what I did. And then we pass selected object to the new view controller, which is what I did. So given that we now have some code that tells us what you do in this function, we no longer need a comment to tell us how this works. You might like that, in which case maybe a comment that says full image view controller should be presented modally. So we called it modal to remind us. Again, you kind of can debate about whether or not that comment is useful. I don't like these kinds of comments personally, because as soon as this line of code moves, and you would never have it down here, but now you've got this floating comment that no longer makes sense to anything. So I typically like to avoid these kinds of comments, because when they get orphaned like that, they kind of lose their meaning and they just become noise in the code base. And again, if you're working in a large team, you don't know, like, should I delete this? It doesn't seem to make sense. I don't know if it makes sense to someone else and I'm just missing something. So cleaning up these sorts of things really are helpful. You might also see people do something where if they have a guard or an if statement that has multiple cases, or multiple conditions rather, you might see them put them on a new line. You can do that. I like them all in one thing until it gets too big. You might also see people do something like this, which, again, do what makes sense for you, your team, your code base, whatever makes it so that you think your code will be readable for ever and ever. In fact, while we're here, I'm going to move this up here into our guard, because that can be optional, so we want to make sure that that's there. And now that we've got these three conditions, this actually might be the case that I bumped this down, because now it's starting to get a little long, and I want to make sure that people can see it. I'm also going to give a little bit of space above that return, just to make sure the eye can glance over this and know that, okay, I'm done with my conditions. Now I'm in the body of this guard. That's a little bit more of a nitpicky thing. That's more of like a me thing, but if you like it, do it, and if you don't, no worries. Okay, so moving back up the file, we've got more of these auto-generated warning codes or comments, so we can just go ahead and get rid of those. I'm going to add a little bit of spacing here just to make sure that this is stands out a little bit more. In fact, I don't know, do I still need this? Let's comment this out and let's see if our header still shows up the way it should. It does. Yeah, so this is a great little lesson here. Sometimes when you're working on something, you're just trying whatever to get your code to work, to get your simulator looking the way that you designed it, your designer designed it. This was something that I tried because my header wasn't showing up. My header, I think, was a 0 height or a 0 width or something like that. And I found this snippet on Stack Overflow. I put it in the code. I don't remember if it worked before or after, or rather, I don't remember if it worked immediately after or after I'd done something different. But I never came back and deleted it. And so it's always a good practice where if your code is not needed, you delete it. This is a whole monster that we're gonna deal with after we've done a first pass on this file. And here we got some more generated code hints from Xcode that we can just remove. It's sort of there to help you make sure your file and your view is set up the way that you might want it. All right, so we deleted a good deal of code here, which is pretty good. I don't remember what size this was at. Let me hit Command Z real quick and see how big the file was before our refactoring here. Oop, going too far, So it was about 180-ish. So we've already knocked off about 60 lines of code, give or take. So already we're making our code a lot more readable, which I'm a big fan of. View controller by removing unused code and auto generated comments. Whew. All right, so that was a whole lot. Did a good deal right there. And if you pushed this code up, with the exception of this and this, you've got a pretty good view controller put together. So let's start cleaning up those two things I highlighted. And in order to do that, I'm actually going to start refactoring my folder structure. So there is a concept in programming that's been around for a very, very long time. And this is like a design pattern. There are several different design patterns, but the one that I like to use, because it's the one that most people teach in school and most systems support, is ModelViewController, or MVC. And you've got this relationship here where a model, which is your data structure, your object, your thing that holds data temporarily, a thing that represents data, and that is what is used to display in your view. And so your view is your visual part of the thing that the user sees, and the controller is the thing that does all the manipulation work. What's up, Kombucha? Thanks for coming out. So our controller will take interactions from the user, manipulate the model in some way, which will then update the view that the user then sees. And so you've got these nice sort of lines drawn for roles and responsibilities of these things. So these are our models, and they're just hanging out in the middle of our view controller. My mic sounds really weird, like a robot. Thank you, thank you. Let me mute myself and fix that real quick. Perfect, no static. Thank you. So a lot of people like to organize their folder structures into the design pattern that they're using. So I'm going to go ahead and just real quick make a new group, which is another name for a folder inside of Xcode. And I'm going to call this models. And inside of models, I'm going to start moving these things over. When I was writing this, I was kind of going back and forth in my head about whether these should each be in their own file. Generally, you want to have each model be in their own file, but these four models are really, really hyper related, and they're also really small, so I don't see too big of a point in breaking them up. So I'm going to call this file, I guess, response model, and I'm just going to move all of those models that are related to our JSON parsing into that file. Ooh, geez. I'm going to have to import UIKit because our UI image on the post. Then I'm going to go back and I'm also going to move out subreddit into its own model. And you can see everything went red. So now might be a good time to give our project a quick build and run just to make sure that everything hooked itself back up. It should have, but better safe than sorry when you're refactoring. And look, we've got a new picture in our awe. This Great Dane pup is just 14 weeks old. Very regal. I like dogs. I'm a dog person. Cool. So we're already down below 100 lines in this file, which is fantastic. So let's go ahead and let's commit that, which again gives us a nice little snapshot in time of when we know that our code is good and clean and working. And I'll push that up too in case you want to check out the code locally on your own machine with the !project command in chat. Also, if you're joining us late and you're curious about our links for either Swift Coders or the Ray Wenderlich affiliate program that we are a part of, I believe that is !links in the chat. Okay, so before I tackle this get function, let's do one last thing where you saw me do it before. I'm going to move these things out into extensions. Now, there is no delegate function for segue stuff, so I can't give this scoping, but I can use our mark to give some scoping that way. And because this is declared as a TableViewController, again, I can't do the scoping for that stuff. But I can reuse the mark as well. Okay, so again, now in our little drop down, we've got nice lines, and you can get kind of cute with these lines if that's something you're into. So I can add another mark that is just a line, and you can see now navigation is a nice little box. Do whatever works for you and your team. I could do 2 of these in a row, so now I've got a double line. Whatever makes your code cleaner and nicer to you. I'm going to give another mark here for my life cycle because I like to do that. And now I want to add one last mark for data fetching. Kind of makes this a little bit weird. In fact, I think I'm going to get rid of the data fetching and the life cycle, just because this was already pretty slim enough, minus this monstrosity. Okay, so we've got our models set up. We've cleaned up our controller some. Let's commit that. Cool. So, there's a terrible, terrible joke in our community that goes something to the effect of, what does MVC stand for? Massive View Controller. And that's because people just jam all these things that don't belong there into a single file, a single view controller, because it's really easy to think everything that's on the screen should be a single view controller, because it is a single view, it's a single screen. But we can have multiple controllers doing multiple things. And so originally when I had envisioned this, instead of using a table header, I was going to have this just be another view controller, and it would have started in this file and I would have pulled it out. But this ended up being a little bit quicker of an implementation on Saturday. But in that relationship of ModelViewController, it doesn't really describe this view controller thing that we get from Apple, from Xcode, from development on their platforms. So that's where that massive view controller comes from. And there have been a few talks about how to handle this. Smart people have started taking design patterns from other programming languages and other tech stacks and applying them. So that's where you start to hear about MVVM or Viper or Clean. All of those are great. All of those can work here, but MVC still works. It's been around since the 70s. It's tried and true. You just need to sort of think outside the view controller and break things down into smaller view controllers. So like our table header, it's a view, but you know, if I had a bunch of interactions in here, this could be a view controller, and maybe it even should be because I've got all the delegate stuff in here. But the point I'm trying to make is you want your files, your classes, your code to be individual small focused things, and all of this networking in here is not at all focused. This has nothing to do with the view. This is a whole other thing. And I'm gonna sort of drive that point home by moving code around a little bit more. So if we ignore the word controller, our view controllers are really just views that have a little extra that they can do. And then inside of views, I'm going to go even more granular, and I'm going to say cells. So now I'm taking just like a giant list of code on the left, and I'm making it smaller and smaller and smaller. Some people would argue that the main storyboard is a view. I guess I'm one of those people, so let's move that up into here. And also it's good to sort by name to get everything alphabetical, so it's easier to sort of scan. And in keeping with that, let's move our views below our models. And I'm going to make one more folder, one more group. I'm going to call it controllers. And this is where I'm going to move that networking code. And the first controller, and really the only controller that I'm going to make, I'm going to call network controller. Now, depending on how big and feature-rich your app is, you might need more than one network controller. You might need a series of controllers that talk to a manager controller that sort of ties all the pieces together. But our app here is very simple. So I'm just going to have a struct that I call network controller, and I'm going to I'm going to copy paste the code from this TableViewController just as it is. Of course, I need to import UIKit. And you can see it starts to get a little annoyed with what I'm doing here. So let's clean this up a little. we're giving back posts, which is fine. We just don't have self anymore. Our self was our table view controller, and our self here does not have posts. I can add a variable post, but that doesn't really make sense for networking. I can instead add in a completion handler. And we'll keep this simple. And we'll have this be an array of post. And our completion handler is void. And here I can do completion. I don't know why I keep trying to capitalize that. Completion posts. So what this is doing this function parameter that we've just added, completion, is a closure. And so what I'm saying is, when you call this function, I want you to also give me a closure. And I'm going to use that closure to let you know when I am done doing something. And so the call site for this will end up looking like get subreddit dot and then we'll have some curly braces. And inside of those curly braces, I'll have access to my posts. And so then down here I can do that self.posts equals posts. And to make the call site even nicer, I'm going to make this a static function. So then we can go back over to our TableViewController, and I can replace all of this with network controller dot get. And I'm going to give a quick build because it looks like I'm getting my code completion disappeared, which happens sometimes when you're refactoring a bunch of code. All right, it doesn't want to come back, so we'll do subreddit, and we'll pass in our subreddit. Then we'll write our completion block, and we can do self.posts equals posts. So if we didn't break anything, we should be able to hit run and everything should work. Beautiful. And so this is sort of what the practice of refactoring is you're making small moves that over time become big moves that make your code smaller, nicer, more organized, more clean. And so this file that was close to 200 lines is now 73, 72. Which is fantastic. And we're putting responsibilities of things in right places. Okay. So let's commit this up. Cool. So I can stop there with our networking code. This is still kind of gross. There's no real delineation of what's going on at these different steps. And I want to clean that up. I'm also not a huge fan of dispatch groups, but that's a whole other thing. That was needed so that we were able to say, hey, we're done building our posts. This isn't necessarily the right thing to do, and we might even change that a little bit after. But I'm going to create a new function. It'll be another static function, and I'll call this get image URL. So if you're not familiar with this, this gives us a nice little facade for our function. So the person calling the function will see get image, but our variable inside of the function will be image URL. And so that's what's going on in here. So let's grab this because that's what that code is related to. And so what we're doing is for each post that's in our array of response posts, we're getting the image URL out. Oh, we're actually making it a URL. So instead of a string here, we'll use URL. And then we can change this to just be URL. Which means we can pass URL into here. And again, we're going to need a completion handler because we need to say, hey, we've got your image. What do you want to do with it? So we will write another one. And you might see in code people using the result type these days, which definitely you can and should do. But I'm trying to keep this example a little bit simpler. But basically, a result type is an enum that it has two cases. The cases are a success, and it gives you the object that you're trying to get, or a failure, which gives you an error back. I don't care about error handling in this project. It's not the point of today's meetup. We're more talking about techniques for cleaning up your code. And so here I can do, again, network controller dot get image for image URL, and our completion gives us our image back. And that's what we're going to use this code for. You can see we've got this dispatch group leave here. We can move that back up into here. And our completion gives back our image. And we can no longer just return here. So these returns become, in fact, we can even, let's combine these two guards. So we can't just return. I guess we can, but we would never complete, so we would never hit our closure here, our trailing closure. And so here we want to complete with nil, because we do allow for an optional UI image in our completion handler. So now that we have moved this out, let's quickly just look at the code to make sure we didn't visually break anything. We are getting the response back, and for each thing that's in our response, we didn't touch this code up here. We are entering a dispatch group where so we probably don't want to enter the dispatch group until we've guarded, because we don't leave it otherwise. And the way that a dispatch group works, if you're not familiar, is it's sort of like a counter system. And so each time you call enter on your dispatch group, that counter goes up by 1. And each time you leave that dispatch group, it goes down by 1. And you can increment this and decrement this as many times as you want, but as soon as it hits 0, this dispatch group notify will be called. And so our case here is we don't want to leave this function until we have fully formed posts that have an image or a nil. Again, not the best pattern. People usually get the images asynchronously from the rest of the response, because that's what that whole pause is here, is the JSON comes back pretty quickly. I've then got to go out and fetch 25 high-res images. So maybe I want to do that on a per cell basis as the cell swipes through. That's definitely something that you can make more performant with your code. Another fun bug, these have blank images because these are GIFs, and our code does not support animated GIFs. So if we go over to Earthporn, once we've downloaded all the images, you can see we've got some more GIFs. So actually hoping there wouldn't be any. Probably wouldn't be any with battle stations. Can't imagine someone's animating a picture of their computer. There we go. So if you're wondering, that's why those are blank. And also the scroll stutter. Oh god, it's more. So these don't have, these are text threads, so they don't have images. Things I didn't account for when building this app. But we broke out responsibilities. So this one function was responsible for doing a whole bunch of things, and we've pulled it out a little bit further. We can go even farther if we wanted to, and we could move these data parsing things into functions. I don't mind them being there. If you do, for sure, move those out into their own functions. But I feel pretty good that we have made our code a little bit more organized. And in this case, we actually made this file a little bit longer, which sometimes you do with refactoring. You know, we added an additional function, but that let us take this chunk of code out of the middle of this one, which makes it a little bit nicer in my opinion. Okay, so let's commit that up. By breaking up calls. Yeah, by breaking up calls. And I'll push that up in case you're playing at home. And chat, if you give me 2 minutes, I'm just going to go refill my water. I'll be right back. I'm back. Sorry, it took a little longer than expected. I also need to take care of something with my puppy. Okay. So, code is feeling a whole lot more organized, a whole lot more clean and pretty. There's just one more thing that it's been irking me since I wrote it. And I wrote it so that it would irk me so that we could have this great example. And that is in our header view. So we've got our picker view stuff here, and the way that this is set up, so we draw the title for each of the rows in our picker view. So that's this. And then when you select one, which is just leaving your mouse on it or your finger, like letting your finger up from it, we come into this didSelectRow function. And so I assign responder from the text field, and I set the text to be whatever row you've selected, which came from here. And I reach up into the application. I get its window, I get its view controller, which I know to be the TableViewController, and I tell the table to go do some networking. And I absolutely hate that. This is what's called an anti-pattern. You're doing something that, yes, functionally works, but is considered bad to do. So we've got a child, actually a child of a child, so a grandchild, telling its grandparent, or going to its grandparent, which is our shared application, and saying, hey, grandma, grandpa, go tell my mom and my dad to do a thing, which is us getting the view controller and then calling get on it. That is terrible, absolutely terrible. And so to account for that, Apple has given us something called protocols in Swift. There are some conventions with your protocols. You tend to want to give them names that imply functionality that they can do. So our protocol, let's call it subreddit swappable. So we are able to swap subreddits if we conform to this protocol. And in this protocol, oh, Anonymous, thank you for gifting out a sub to Taglish. Very kind of you. Taglish, enjoy your subscription to my channel. So our protocol, I guess there's a couple ways that we can handle this. So we can call this get function, and we can move the get function into our protocol. So it can be func get subreddit. And that'll be a subreddit that you're getting. And that might be enough. We could also have it be func update subreddit. Update subreddit. I think for simplicity's sake, let's keep it as get. And so we'll go back to our TableViewController. Oh, excuse me, we'll stay in our header real quick, and we'll make another variable. And this one we're going to make a week variable. We're making it week so that there's not a retain cycle, because what we're doing now is we're giving a hook from our child to our parent so that our child can communicate with the parent in a more structurally sound and more responsible way. So if they have a strong relation to each other, when the parent goes to get deallocated, the child won't go because it's holding on to the parent in memory, and vice versa. So they kind of just hold on to each other forever, and those add up, and over time you can actually get what's called a memory leak, and your app will crash. So by making this weak, it says, hey, just destroy this thing when it comes time to clean up all the resources. And I'm going to call it swappable delegate Some people will just call this delegate, and that's totally okay to do. By giving it the name swappable delegate, I'm telling you what kind of delegate it is, which helps when you're lower down in code. And that means we can get rid of this guard where we're getting our table, and instead we can say delegate, swappable delegate dot get, and that ends up being this function signature, because again, code completion has gone away on me. And so now if I run, it should actually not work because I've not set up that delegate relationship. We do have an error here which says weak delegates must be class bound. We know that this will be a class because it's going to be our view controller. And this is complaining that this is optional, so we'll put the question mark there. And nothing should happen because I can't select, or when I select a row, let's put a breakpoint here. Our function will still be called, but I have no swappable delegate. It will be nil here. And so the way that I solve that is back in our TableViewController, when we are declaring our header, I can also set our swappable delegate to be self. And if I build, this will say, hey, you can't do that. You're not a swappable delegate. And if we click on the stop sign and we hit fix, it will go ahead and add that up here, which will give us another stop sign once it builds. Oh. Why is that? Well, it's because we already have this function here. Now, you might be thinking, we moved all of this code out because it was not related to the view. Why not move out that as well? So we can. We'll say extension subreddit TableViewController, and this will be for our swappable subreddit. And to match what we've done elsewhere in the code, we'll add a mark. And we can move this code down into there. We'll remove it from here so it's not double declared. And we should get back our functionality of being able to swap subreddits. And so this pattern is the delegate pattern, which we've already used with our table view because we're letting this view controller tell Apple's TableViewController what to do by delegating responsibilities up to it. That's the delegate pattern. You can see I switched back to battle stations, and we can again see people's awesome computers with their great views. This is actually the keyboard that I have. This is a Keychron K4, I think is what it is. K6, something like that. It's a super nice keyboard. I would suggest it if you enjoy the clicky clackies coming from my end. That has a great view. So yeah. Now, there's kind of the question of where does this protocol live? Does it live here with the header because it's the one calling out to it? Does it live in the table because it's the one that needs to conform to it? Does it live in its own file? All three of those are perfectly fine. Oh, Joe Cab, I missed your follow. Thank you very much 5 minutes ago. Appreciate it. You know, the whole exercise here has been me showing you what I like to do to organize my code and tips and tricks of how I sort of refactor my code into nice small pieces that have single functions, single responsibilities. So to you, a protocol might be another folder here. So, you know, let's go ahead and do that. Oof. I don't know why Xcode does this, where it shows you that it's letting you edit and then it decides it doesn't want to anymore. Always trips me up. And we'll grab this protocol and we'll pop that in there. The whole exercise, again, is just about making your code clean and small, well organized for what works for your mind and your team's mind. Put this in alphabetical order because that is important to my mind. And yeah, I feel like we've got a pretty nice project compared to what we used to have. Refactored anti-pattern of reaching into grandparent app application to allow the child to tell its parent, child, what do I call it? Table header view. To tell its parent subreddit table view controller what to do by adding the delegation pattern. So you can see this is a really long commit message, and it's up to you whether or not you want to do that, but I find the more detail that you can put into a commit message, the more useful it is for you when you come back a year later and you're thinking to yourself, what is subreddit swappable? Why do I have this protocol? Oh, I refactored this anti-pattern out. So that's what it's used for. And I give the names for all the files so I can go and be like, okay, here is my swappable delegate now, and here is the parent responding to it. So little hints like that, little hints like the mark, all these things sort of help you get by with your code over time. Kombucha Xcode, you know, a lot of people hate on it. I've used a bunch of different IDEs over the course of my career in my journey learning programming, and Xcode really isn't as bad as people make it out to be. It's not great, don't get me wrong, there's a million things that could be done better, but I don't know. I also don't tend to have as many problems as a bunch of people have, like Xcode running out of memory and crashing all the time. The worst that I get is just my syntax highlighting goes away sometimes, which isn't great, but I can live with it. So we moved all our code around, and our app is still working, and these cats are still kissing in the fridge, which is still cute. Here's a smile for your day. That's what I got for you all. We can compare so this is what our project used to be, which was just all of our files in one folder. Our TableViewController was 180 lines, and now I believe it's below 70. So that's sort of what refactoring is all about, is you're bringing something that's kind of broad and gross and doing more than it probably should, and you're making it a little bit more simple, clean, and to the point. Like this, it's a lot more organized in my opinion, and I hope you feel the same, and I also hope that you learn something. Again, if you're interested in checking out this project either now or later, you can do !project in the chat. That will take you to the GitHub for this, and you can pull down the code, you can play with it, you can expand on it. Maybe you want to add a spinner, because it's weird to just have the app seem to freeze when you're switching subreddits. A nice little spinner in the middle of everything might let you know that something's happening before the screen just flips away. I highly encourage you to pull down the code and have some fun playing with it. But yeah, that's this meetup. Thank you all for watching. I hope to see you next month. We do this meetup the third Thursday of every month, and